Dr. Sachs, can you tell us what do you think are the main contributors to teen stress?
Well, I think it varies from one teenager to the next. For some teens, it's a parent's divorce, the illness of a friend, the girls all being mean to this girl, the boys disrespecting this boy. I think every teenager has their own story. As to the question, have you spent one meal? Have you shared one meal with a parent in the last 24 hours? But in 2005, barely 30% of Canadian teenagers answered yes to the question, have you had one meal with a parent in the last 24 hours? Those were 15, 16, and 17-year-olds in both cases. So in just the span of 13 years, from 1992 to 2005, we went from most Canadian teenagers having at least one meal with a parent in 24 hours to most Canadian teenagers not having a meal with a parent in 24 hours. Okay, so what does that have to do with stress? I think the answer comes, a variety of sources, but one really good source is Gordon Neufeld. Dr. Gordon Neufeld, a Canadian psychiatrist, not well known in Ontario, I find, very well known in British Columbia, where he works, but not so well known in the rest of the country. He has really thought a lot about this. What's the difference between a peer-oriented culture, like the one we have today across Canada and across the United States, and a parent-oriented culture, like we had 50 years ago and 100 years ago and 200 years ago? He points out that a child's relationship with a parent is non-contingent. I'm going to be my daughter's father, regardless of how she behaves tomorrow. I'll still be her father, and I'll still love her, and she knows that. But sometimes she's mean to me. Sometimes she'll say unkind things to me. But she knows it's not going to change the nature of our relationship. I'm not happy if she says something unkind to me, but I'm not going to say, go away, I never want to talk to you again. I just won't, because good parents don't do that. But friends do. Friendship is utterly contingent, as Dr. Neufeld points out. Emily and Melissa may be best friends, but that friendship could end tomorrow in a heartbeat, and they both know it. So Melissa's checking her phone every 5 minutes because if Emily sends her a text, she wants to answer it right away, because if you don't answer your text for 4 hours, she might think you're mad at her. And then this whole big war starts because she thinks you're mad at her because you didn't answer your text. So you cannot rest. You cannot relax. You can't pause for even a moment. Because if it's all about whether your friends like you or not, that's pretty scary. You might be the most popular girl in the school, but you could lose that overnight. And everyone knows girls who have. So the shift from a parent-oriented culture to peer-oriented culture is terribly harmful to kids. They can't relax, they can't rest. Parents nurture their teenage sons and daughters. Peers cannot nurture. Nurturing is something that parents offer to children. Peers cannot nurture same-age peers. Peers don't make sacrifices for their peers. They're not supposed to. It's not their job description. Parents unhesitatingly make sacrifices for their children, and their children know that. So if you care more about your parents than about your peers, then you can relax. You can actually be better friends. But if it's all about what your friends think, then you can't relax. That's one factor. It's not the only factor. It's maybe not even the most important factor. But it's one of several factors that is driving this explosion in anxiety among teenagers.
How serious a situation is this, in your opinion, teens and stress?
Well, I think it's terribly serious. You look objectively at the rates of clinically significant diagnosable anxiety and depression across North America over the last 40 years, increased about 70% for boys, about 400% for girls. So on that parameter, you'd say, okay, girls and boys have both suffered, but girls have suffered more. Well, on that parameter, but if you ask the question, who's not working in school? Who's not working hard to get an A instead of a B? On that parameter, again, Statistics Canada shows us it's boys. And here there's a huge change that's occurred, very well documented by scholars at Statistics Canada, especially Mark Frenetta and Clark Zeman, Z-E-M-A-N, who've written a number of monographs anybody can pull up at the Stats Canada website. One of them is called, Why Are Most University Students Women? And it starts with that question. It starts by documenting the fact that 40 years in Canada, most university students were men. Now they're mostly women. It's 61% of recent university graduates across Canada are women, 39% are male. But then they dig deeper and they find you can predict at age 15 across Canada who's going to attend university and who's going to graduate from university based on who's getting good grades at age 15, who's doing their homework at age 15, and who reads for fun at age 15. Those three parameters account for most of the variance in the data, according to these scholars at Stats Canada. Well, so you can't blame them at university. At age 15, you can already tell, because across Canada, who's getting good grades, who's doing their homework, and who's reading for fun? It's girls. Girls in Canada today are much more likely to be doing those things than boys are. That wasn't true 40 years ago, but it is true today. Across North America, who's graduating with honors? Women now outnumber men at university by more than 3 to 1. It's a huge change from 40 years ago. 40 years ago, men were disproportionately represented among those graduating with honors. 40 years ago, women were more likely than men were to drop out of university, very often because they were getting married and starting a family. Today, men across Canada and across the United States are more likely to drop out of university than women are. And it's not because they're staying home to raise baby. It's often because they're going back to their parents' home to play video games in the basement. So young men today are disengaged from the real world of school, academic achievement, and the workplace, and more likely to be addicted to video games than girls are on that parameter. So depending on which parameter you look at, you can say, well, girls are more disadvantaged in this way, but boys are more disadvantaged in this way. These are kind of the worst of times for both girls and boys. Now, I'm not saying that 50 years ago were the good old days. They weren't. 50 years ago, that was racist and sexist. We don't want to go back to that. 50 years ago, women didn't have equal rights. There are no good old days for women. No era in Western civilization has affirmed the interests and achievements and liberty of girls and women to the same extent as it has for boys and men. But this era has its challenges, and I don't think people are recognizing. I don't think there's widespread recognition of how toxic this culture is for girls and for boys. Toxic in different ways. We've got a lot of girls who are very anxious, staying up past midnight, photoshopping their pictures for their Facebook page. A lot of boys who are staying up past midnight, firing photon torpedoes at the enemy. But they're all sleep deprived, and they're not doing as well as they could be.
So what kind of advice then would you give parents who may have, preteens, tweens, teens? What should they be doing, we all be doing, that we're not doing?
Yeah. Well, that's really the objective in my second book, Boys Adrift, and my third book, Girls on the Edge, to come up with some very concrete, practical recommendations that are grounded in evidence. So, for example, at 9 o'clock each night, the mobile phone is switched off and it goes in the charger, which stays in the parent's bedroom. Because a lot of kids across Canada, especially girls, are going to bed with their mobile phone switched on. And 1 in the morning, your daughter's getting a phone call from her friend about the party that just ended, and she's up for an hour in the middle of the night texting, and parents don't even know this is happening because they never heard a phone ring. It just buzzed, it vibrated, and she's not talking, she's texting. The principles of good parenting haven't changed. 20 years ago, parents didn't let their kids accept phone calls in the middle of the night to exchange gossip because parents knew it's more important for kids to get a good night's sleep than to be up for an hour in the middle of the night gossiping. That was true then, and it's still true today. The only thing that has changed is the technology. It's now possible for a girl to accept a phone call at 1 in the morning and be up for an hour in the middle of the night gossiping, but that doesn't mean that she should. And this is the parent's job. It's not reasonable to expect your daughter to say to her friend tomorrow morning, for your daughter to say, when her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight, how come you didn't answer? It's not reasonable to expect your daughter to say, well, I thought it was more important for me to get a good night's sleep than to answer your text. I mean, that's just not reasonable. You have to allow your daughter to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every night at 9 o'clock. They won't let me have it back till the next morning. I say to parents, you have to be the evil parent. You have to ensure that your relationship with your teenager, with your child, comes before their relationship with other peers. So, very concrete example, you're going on a vacation to the ski resort. Your daughter asks if she can bring her friend along. The friend's parents will pay her way. No, I'm sorry, it's not allowed. And that seems harsh, but if your daughter brings her friend to the ski resort, they're going to be going up in the chairlift with each other, okay? You're supposed to be going up in the chairlift with your daughter. Going up in the chairlift is a great time for you and your daughter to have a chat, for her to talk about whatever is on her mind. The point of the vacation, the reason you're doing this, is to restore bonds with your child, with your teenager. And if they bring a friend along, it's much harder to do that. You've got to insist that your relationship comes before her relationship with her friend. It feels unnatural, and it is unnatural, as Dr. Neufeld says, because this culture is unlike any culture of which we have any record. We have no record of any enduring culture where kids valued relationships with other same age kids above their relationship with their parents. We know of no such culture, but that's the culture in which we live. And that culture puts a burden on parents to do their homework, to understand the challenges, and to make sure that they're doing the right thing. It doesn't come naturally. You have to know what you're doing.
You mentioned that you have written numerous books. You're crisscrossing the globe, speaking to all kinds of different people, schools, educators, students about this topic. What strikes you about what you're hearing from different parts of the world on this topic?
Well, it's true, I've spoken in Germany, Italy, and Spain, but for the most part, my talks have been in the English-speaking world: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, England, Scotland. And what really strikes me about my conversations with parents is how American culture has poisoned the world, to be perfectly blunt. You cannot escape it. You know, I flew 13 hours from Los Angeles to Auckland 2 weeks ago, get off the airplane, and the first thing you see is a big New Zealand magazine with a photograph of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie on the cover. You just can't escape it. And talking to girls in Adelaide, South Australia, on March 28th, it's the same conversation that I have with girls in Toronto or Vancouver or Dallas, Texas, or Los Angeles, or here at home in Philadelphia. The culture of middle income and affluent English speakers has become homogenized. There's remarkably little difference between South Australia and Edinburgh, Scotland, and Westchester County, New York. I mean, the accents are different, but the movie stars are the same. They're literally watching the same movies, reading the same books. They're all obsessed with The Hunger Games and Brad Pitt and many of the same TV shows.
What worries you most as a researcher, as a doctor, as a PhD, as a speaker, about what you're seeing? Is it the lack of recognition of many parents, that may feel powerless and helpless?
I think that's a good way of summarizing it. I like to quote a study, a very important paper by the German sociologist Norbert Elias, who said that one of the biggest changes in the second half of the 20th century was the transfer of authority from parents to children. That parents today are insecure, uncertain. They don't know what authority they have. I was just talking by Skype with Dr. Timothy Wright, head of school at Shore, also known as Sydney Church of England Anglican Grammar School in North Sydney, Australia. And he said the same thing I've heard from administrators across North America, which is parents will say, I want to be my son's best friend. And what you have to explain to them is, no, that's not your role. Your role is not to be your son's best friend, to hang out with him and play video games with him. Your role is to be the parent. That's different from being the best friend. A best friend does not say to another best friend, I'm taking away your video game device. I'm turning off your mobile phone because you don't seem to understand limitations on its use. Friends don't say that to other friends, but parents may have to say that to children. And if you're playing the role of a friend, it makes it more difficult to do some of the things you need to do as a parent. So, yeah, that's the thing that most concerns me about English speakers. But, another reporter asked me, am I concerned for the human race? I said, no, I'm not at all concerned about the human race. When you speak to families from Brazil, from India, from China, they have no doubts about the authority of the parents. They're doing really well. And the human race is going to do very well. Whether the leading nations in 50 years' time will be the English-speaking nations, I think, is very doubtful, unless the English speakers can get their act together. But I'm not concerned about the human race. There are other cultures that parents have a very good understanding of their role. I'm not saying China's wonderful. China has major problems, as does India, as does Brazil. Each culture has its own problems. What troubles me about we, especially here in North America, is I don't think that there's widespread understanding of what the issues are. 50 years ago, everybody knew the culture was racist and sexist, and we needed to do something about that. Today, I don't find a consensus or even an awareness that our Anglophone culture of North America is going on the rocks because parents don't have a clue what they should be doing.